Hi, I'm Ken Steele. I'm back in the brand chemistry lab to talk to you about some brand trends I've noticed in recent years. At the same time, as we have plenty of institutions trying to own a word in Canadian higher ed, there are examples of institutions trying to disown a word as well. Again, I'm drawing from that survey I did years back now of 100 or so institutional rebranding efforts around the world. A very clear trend that I identified back in 2018 was the move for colleges to drop the word college, to drop the word community, if that still existed, and to go with either no noun at all, or to shift towards polytechnic or some other status if they were able to. In the United States, community colleges have been battling the stigma of community college head-on. This has been exacerbated by comedies, for instance, Chevy Chase's Community, that reinforce the idea that community colleges are not serious academic institutions. It is an uphill battle to overcome some of those preconceptions. Here in Canada, what we're seeing more often is colleges dropping the word and shifting towards polytechnic in name or in marketing messages. In Western Canada, we've seen quite a few institutions adopting polytechnic as part of their names in recent years. Aurora College is currently discussing the possibility. In Ontario, there have been quite a few that have done likewise. So disavowing the word college, I guess, is one of the things I think we're seeing. We're also seeing some pretty consistent trends in terms of visual identity, what I'll call logo cliches. When I identified the most frequent choices for new identities, they were initials, acronyms, monograms, and then architecture, abstract designs, and so on down the list. We see a lot of architectural identities. From that survey of 105, there were plenty of examples of bell towers, steeples, arches, colonnades that reflect something distinctive about the campus architecture for the institution. But we're also seeing plenty of institutions adopting heraldic shields as a way to suggest their history, their traditions, their prestige, their academic respectability. In fact, of those 100 or so institutions, fully a third were adopting shields or shield-shaped icons for their new visual identities. And this was particularly pronounced among universities, where 40% did so, and religious university colleges, where almost 60% of them did. That's that effort to suggest credibility as a university that religious university colleges have been pushing for some time. Community colleges, far less likely. In that survey, I found about 7% were adopting shield-shaped visual identities. Wasn't a strong direction, but we've seen some examples over the years. Back 20 years ago, when the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology rebranded, it adopted a pretty dynamic shield-shaped identity that put it on par visually with many of the universities that it competes with in Western Canada. When universities in Ontario shifted away from the traditional heraldic coat of arms to architectural emblems, it didn't take long for them to switch back again. We saw this at Western University in 2012, where they've moved back to a streamlined university coat of arms as their visual identity. And we saw something similar at the University of Windsor that adopted a couple of different visual icons instead of their coat of arms before reverting to a shield-shaped icon that looks a bit like the Lancers Athletics logo in their most recent rebrand in 2013. Other community colleges have done the same thing. Norquest in Edmonton dropped its 1950s Jetson logo to adopt a much more shield-shaped visual identity in 2012. Capilano University in BC shifted towards a very modern, indigenous-looking visual shield for their new identity in 2016. Lambton College dropped their wordmark and bridge identities in 2018 to move towards a shield with an intimation of a bridge across the middle of it for their new identity. In Calgary, Bow Valley College moved from a wordmark and a swooshy line that suggests the river to a shield-shaped identity that, again, is a very modern version or interpretation of a heraldic shield, but a shield nonetheless. In Olds, Alberta, the college shifted from a sheaf of wheat to a sheaf of wheat and a maple leaf, to most recently in 2022, a visual identity that again adopts a shield-shaped identity in a very modern form factor. In Saskatchewan, Cumberland College and Parkland College merged to form Suncrest College, and the visual identity they adopted is a loose sketch of a shield shaped like the letter S. In January 2024, Cambrian College abandoned the dragon's head logo they'd been using for some 50 years to shift towards a shield-shaped emblem that is comprised of two letters C to represent their institution. The University of Guelph adopted in the 80s a very finicky serif typeface wordmark, but in 2025, they've shifted back towards a more traditional shield-shaped identity, even though that shield includes a griffin, which was never part of the coat of arms of the University of Guelph. The griffin is part of their athletics identity, which they united into the new visual identity for the university. Also this year, Mount Royal University in Calgary shifted from a leaf-shaped set of 3 chevrons to a single chevron that looks more like a book or an open door, or you could argue a shield shape of some sort, very stylized version of a shield. I'd say the same for Holland College in Prince Edward Island, who abandoned their visual identity in early 2025 to adopt a much more modern typeface and a shield shape, which they claim is a building blocks, but it looks like a shield or a book in a lot of ways as well. And in the UK, we saw another institution do the same thing this summer. Warwick abandoned the aubergine W for a much more traditional looking shield, even though this does not reflect a coat of arms that's actually official for their institution. They've added a bunch of elements to it in a way that I don't find quite as convincing. The DNA strands, the atom, and so on. But while plenty of colleges are adopting shields to look more like universities, many universities are either streamlining their shields or abandoning them altogether to look less like a European colonial enterprise that is bringing ancient heraldic traditions to North America. You can see this sort of move to decolonize visual identities in a lot of different ways. But I think just a few examples where the shield has changed. University of Manitoba is one of my favorites from 2019. They've adopted a shield outline, but a much less heraldic looking shield shape for the University of Manitoba. Justice Institute of BC abandoned a shoulder patch or shield-shaped emblem in 2022 to adopt a much more loose interpretation, really, of their visual identity. Assiniboine College in Manitoba dropped their shield-shaped identity in June 2024 to adopt something they call a teepee-shaped identity that is indigenously inspired and far less colonial. And just as we're trying to decolonize, there's also an effort to secularize religious institutions. I did a separate episode on that for 10 with Ken, but one example of many would be Concordia University of Edmonton, where the visual identity has shifted away from Christian symbolism towards something much more modern and mainstream.